started. Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us tonight for How Your Vote Impacts Early Education. My name is Jennifer Hernandez, and I am the Northern Arizona Regional Community Engagement Coordinator for Expect More Arizona. Expect More Arizona is a statewide, nonpartisan education advocacy organization. We are a nonprofit 501c3 that helps people understand what is happening in education, why they should care about it, and what they can do about it. Tonight you'll be hearing from our excellent panelists, all of which have extensive expertise in the early childhood field. I'd like to take a minute now to introduce them all to you. First, we have Liz Barbara Alvarez, who is the Chief Policy Advisor for First Things First. Next, we'll have Dr. Eric Boucher, the Executive Director for the Arizona Association for the Education of Young Children. Next, I will introduce Carmen Producer, who is the Program Manager for the Arizona Early Childhood Education Association. Next, we will hear from Ron, who is a quality first coach with the Association for Supportive Child Care. Before we get started, I just want to let the audience know that we do have the Q&A function enabled in this webinar. Depending on time, we will try to get to any questions that you have toward the end of the hour, but feel free to type them in at any time during tonight's program. So first up for this evening's presentation, we have Liz Alvarez, who will share some really important information. First things first, including how the program originated as a voter-led initiative, how it is governed, and how First Things First has impacted the learning and the entire education system. So Liz, if you could turn your camera on.
Actually, Jen, it's saying that you need to start it, that the host needs to start it. Could I just get a really quick check, because I know that there were some folks in the chat who indicated that the audio was breaking up. Would somebody in chat please let me know if you can hear me?
I can hear you, Liz. It's Donna, but Jen's video was breaking up badly. So,
okay.
Yeah. So I turned off your camera, Jen, to see if your audio would get any better. I'm sorry.
Okay. So, thank you to Vicki also for letting me know from the public that you can hear me. So I'm going to get going. I have a lot of area to cover, and we want to make sure that we keep on time. For anybody who knows me, you know I'm a fast talker. There is time at the end for questions, but we want to get you all of this information real quickly. Obviously, the first point is why focus on early childhood? Most of us know instinctively that kids are like sponges, right? They're learning so much when they're young, but research has actually shown that the most phenomenal time for brain growth is the time between birth and 5 years old. This is where a child is developing all of their cognitive, emotional, language, and social skills. This is really the time when those start to develop, and they start to develop as a result of a child's interactions with their caregivers and with their environment. So when they have those positive experiences, positive interactions with caregivers, their brains develop in ways that promote learning. So really that time between birth and 5 years old is the foundation for all learning. Because we're here to talk about education, let's talk about then how that plays out in the educational sphere. What we know is that gaps in children's vocabulary, I'm not sure why the slides keep advancing, but if we could go to the previous slide, please. We know that gaps in children's vocabulary start to appear as early as 18 months, and some studies suggest as early as 9 months. This means that between 9 and 18 months, we're already starting to see a difference between children's brain development when they have very positive experiences and a lot of support versus not having that. That translates into, by the time a child is through, their vocabulary, their attention, and general knowledge are actually good predictors of 3rd and 4th grade reading comprehension. And as many people know, then 3rd grade reading ability is a good predictor of high school graduation. So it's critically important that our children have from that very early time high quality early experiences that promote positive brain growth and set them on a trajectory to success. Next slide. There has been a lot of research done by Nobel Prize winning economist James Heckman. He's probably the best known for doing this kind of research in terms of the return on the investment when we invest in giving children those positive early learning experiences. What happens is our kids are more prepared for kindergarten. They typically have higher third grade reading scores. They have higher graduation rates. They're more ready to enter the workforce, and they typically have better long-term health and well-being outcomes. But the opposite is also true. When children don't have those early learning experiences, it can jeopardize some of this success. Next slide. And individual children are not the only ones who benefit when we give children high quality early learning experiences. We as a state, we as a society benefit because we have lower costs for things like special education and remediation. We have fewer people relying on social welfare programs, and we have reduced crime-related costs, including lower incarceration rates. So early childhood is one of those investments that has far-reaching effects. Yes, of course, for the young children who have access to those programs, but to us as communities and as a state. Next slide. So really, what is the early education system in Arizona? It is actually comprised of a lot of different partners. Obviously, childcare and preschool providers. These are the individuals who are caring for children from the time typically they're born, around 6 months old, until they go into school, and in some cases even afterward, as a lot of kids have their kindergarten experience with the childcare provider as well. Obviously our schools, many of whom do have preschool programs, and our Head Start and Early Head Start programs. What this means, because this is the early learning system in Arizona, it means that there are a lot of different funding sources for those programs. And so early learning in Arizona can be supported by a mixture of municipal funds, so city and county funds, certainly state funds and federal funds, but there's even investments being made by business and philanthropy. And of course, many families also pay for early learning experiences for their children. Next slide. Because of all of those funding sources for early learning in Arizona, that means that a lot of elected officials have the potential to impact the resources that are available to support young children's learning. So that can range all the way from school boards to city councils and mayors, county supervisors, state legislators, some of our statewide elected officials like the governor and the superintendent of public instruction, as well as federal officials like the president, our US senators, and our representatives. Later on in this webinar, some of my colleagues are going to touch a little bit on some of the ways that votes in those areas can impact early learning, but I'm here, next slide, because I work for an organization that is probably the best example of how voting has impacted early education in Arizona. I work for First Things First, and First Things First was created by a citizens ballot initiative. That means not only did voters vote to create First Things First, they actually had to sign their names on petitions and get enough signatures to even get on a ballot to then vote to create First Things First. And in 2006, they did that. It was originally passed in November of 2006 with a majority in every county in Arizona. It is funded through tobacco taxes. It actually sets aside a portion of tobacco taxes exclusively for use for early childhood development and health programs, which include early learning. Voters established First Things First because for a really long time, we would see a pilot program get created, but then it would kind of go away after a while. And really they wanted to create a dedicated funding source to help expand early childhood development and health programs in Arizona. First Things First was put back on the ballot in 2010, and it was reapproved by voters, this time by a 2-to-1 margin in every county of the state, I believe. Next slide. So First Things First has a really unique governance structure. We're governed by a statewide board, and that is appointed by the governor and approved by the Senate. So that's another way that elected officials impact who runs the First Things First board. And by law, we have to have representation from metropolitan and rural counties. We have to have a mix of political party affiliation, so we can't have a majority of any of our board seats belong to any one particular political party, and we have to have representation by a lot of different stakeholders who know the importance of early childhood. So we have folks on there who are parents, we have business people, we have early educators, etc. Then we also have 28 regional partnership councils across the state, which are all run by volunteers. So this is 300 plus people in their communities who have volunteered to serve on these councils, and their job is to look at the needs of children in their community and recommend to the board the types of programs that kids in their community need. This is really important because there is no one-size-fits-all approach to what young children need. So this was the voters' way of making sure that decisions by the First Things First board were informed by local voices. Go ahead. How much money each community gets is also worked out in the statute. Basically, the funds are distributed to communities based on the number of children birth to 5 who live in that community, and also the percentage of young children who live in poverty in that area. So that ensures that we can't play favorites, basically. The way that the money is distributed is by this formula. When monies come in to First Things First, 90% of them go into a program account and 10% go into the administrative account. We can move funding from the administrative account to program, but we can't take money out of the program account and move it to administration. And our actual administrative costs are around 7%. So that's just a fancy way, I guess, of saying that the vast majority of these funds are going to programs for young children. Next slide. The statute that created First Things First, the law that was passed by voters, actually outlines the 6 major areas in which we do our work. And as you can see by the one that is highlighted, a big one is improving the quality of early childhood development and health programs, including early education programs. And that's what I'm going to talk about a lot right now. Next slide. So why do we focus on quality as well as access to that quality? Well, quality matters. Quality matters in everything, and it matters especially in early learning. It goes beyond health and safety practices. Okay, health and safety practices are the floor. I mean, basically you expect any good care environment to have that. But when you have a quality early learning environment, you need teachers who know how to work with young children. You need lower class sizes so that they have the time to devote and give children those quality interactions that they need. You need stimulating indoor and outdoor environments. You know, young children learn in interactions with each other, interactions with their environment. And so those classrooms and those outdoor environments need to stimulate that learning. And you also need curricula that are really evidence-based and rich in language and literacy. So if you're gonna have all of that, that's gonna cost. I mean, it's not gonna come cheap. Early education in Arizona can cost $10,000 a year for an infant. And if you haven't paid for this in a while, that slide shows you how that compares to tuition at a university for a year. If you can imagine young families who are typically starting out in their careers, etc., trying to pay that per child who needs care, it means that a lot of children who really need it are priced out of high quality early learning. At First Things First, we take a couple of steps to try to remedy that. Next slide. So our signature program is called Quality First. 56% of the funding for First Things First every year goes to improving the quality of early learning and access to that. We spend about $28 million a year to help over 1,100 programs work to improve their quality, and with great success. I'll talk about that in a minute. We also spend $43 million a year to give more children access to that quality through scholarships. And we invest $1.5 million a year for college scholarships to give those teachers of young children an opportunity to expand their skills. Next slide. Those efforts have met with quite a bit of success. In 2013, when we rated the programs participating in Quality First, only 1 in 4 was able to meet the quality standards. This year, we're up to 4 out of 5 programs are able to meet the standard, but it takes time and it takes investment. The result of our $69 million investment last year is that almost 61,000 children received their early education from providers committed to quality improvement, including 46,000 children who are in actual centers and homes that are rated at quality. More than 8,000 young kids got a scholarship to attend those environments, and almost 1,200 early educators receive support to expand their skills in supporting young children's learning. Next slide. But we're only scratching the surface. If you take into account what the major programs helping young children access early learning, how many children they're able to serve, as you can see in fiscal year 19, about 85,000 children accessed early learning through those major programs. And there are about 503,000 young children in Arizona, including about 45% of those who live below 200% of the federal poverty level. So we have roughly 145,000 to 274,000 young children who lack access to quality early learning. Next slide. This is especially disturbing because children really do face a lot of obstacles and challenges on their road to school readiness in Arizona. About 1 in 4 live in poverty, 3 out of 5 don't go to preschool, about 1 in 4 aren't receiving the required screenings to detect issues that could become learning problems later on, and 1 out of 8 have had 2 or more adverse experiences, including family violence, perhaps addiction in their families, etc. Not only do we have existing challenges, the population of young kids is expected to increase by 11% by the year 2050. First Things First certainly tries to do its part to support young children, and so do many of our early childhood system partners, but obviously more is needed if we're going to support young children's learning. And my colleagues are about to tell you how voting at the state and federal level can impact that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm hoping everybody can hear me a bit more clearly now. My apologies. We love technology. So Liz, thank you so much for sharing that great information. And for the next portion of our webinar, I would like to invite Dr. Eric Boucher to speak about the Arizona Association for the Education of Young Children and its advocacy objectives for the early childhood system in Arizona. Eric will also share information about the role that the federal government plays in allocating funding for early learning and childcare in our state. So Eric, please take it away.
Great, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Liz, so much for sharing that perspective on all the important work that's been done so far here in Arizona to support young children and families. Next slide, please. My name is Eric. I have the pleasure of working to advance equity, racial, and social justice at the Arizona Association for the Education of Young Children, which is one of 2 of our state affiliates of NAEYC, the National Association for the Education of Young Children. A part of our work is really elevating the voices of early childhood professionals, telling their stories, helping build their advocacy skills to be able to talk about why early childhood is important to them, and then secure those state and federal investments that we need to provide quality experiences for all of Arizona's children, families, and educators. You can stay connected with us here on social media. We share a lot of up-to-date information about when a good time is to contact your legislator and some ideas for things that you might say when talking with your elected officials. Next slide, please. I'm going to share a little bit more about the federal landscape and what our elected officials do and how they impact early childhood at the federal level, and then talk about what the field of early care and education looks like now across the United States, and give you some ideas for things that you can do to make a difference. First and foremost, though, I think the most important thing we want you to get out of tonight's session is that your voice is important and your voice matters. And so the information that we share with you tonight, we hope that you'll take with you to review and to take some action on behalf of young children and families. Would you click through these next bullet points, would you mind? And I'll briefly go over just to give us all a little context about who the people who represent us are. Liz talked a little bit about who our state representatives are, and at the state level, we have the Arizona Senate and the Arizona House of Representatives, as well as other elected officials like our governor, our mayors, commissioners, some of our judges, and school boards. At the federal level, we have a similar setup. We have a Senate and a House of Representatives that makes up our Congress. And then we have other elected officials like our president and our vice president, all of whom make decisions and policy and drive policy that impacts children, families, and educators, either for the positive or for the negative. If you are interested and you're not quite sure who the people who represent you are, one of the websites that I find myself using quite a lot and sharing with the community is this one here at the bottom from childcareaware.org. If you log into this website, you can type in your address and it'll pull up every single one of your elected officials, from the president to your Congress people at the federal level, to your state representatives, as well as any local people from the people who manage our water in the city, to our mayors, to our very local school board representatives. So it has all that information in one place as you're making those decisions to reach out to those legislators to tell them why early childhood is important, and making your voice heard and making those connections with elected officials. Next slide. So I just wanted to give a little bit of a visual about what the federal congressional experience looks like. So we have our senators. There are 2 from each state, 100 in total. That's there on the left-hand side of Congress. And then we have 435 House of Representatives who are, both of whom, U.S. senators and representatives, are elected by you as citizens of Arizona. And then they're based on, the senators are 2 per state, so we vote on 2 in our elections for the state, and then our U.S. representatives are based on population. So you would have 1 based on your home address, which indicates your congressional district. Next page. I'm going to share a little bit of information with you after I share some data that to give you some ideas for how you can make a difference and make your voice heard for early childhood. These are our 2 U.S. senators, and I want you to take a moment, if you're taking notes or you're taking a photo on your phone, document this website and these 2 people, Senators Sinema and McSally. In the next few weeks, these are going to be probably the 2 most important people to reach out to get funding for early childhood at the federal level, as we're looking for relief during the pandemic. So just take a moment to make a note that these are going to be 2 people we're going to invite you to reach out to make your voice heard. So we have our 2 U.S. senators, and then next slide is our 9 congressional representatives. They might look like familiar people. These are the people who live here in Arizona and then fly to DC to represent us in the House of Representatives in Congress. If you are interested in learning more about your representatives, things like the policies that they support, the committees or panels that they serve on, you can go to house.gov/representatives and you can click on your legislator to learn more about what they're interested in, and then try to find that connection to be able to build some relationships and get that investment in early childhood. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to take a little bit of time to do is share some recent data with you about what early care and education looks like during the pandemic. Now, I just want to take a moment to honor that this has been a really challenging and stressful time for all of us, and especially for children, for families, and for educators. The pandemic has really upended the routine that young children have and have become consistent in. And so it really is an important time for us to remember to take good care of children and families, to use a social emotional lens and a well-being lens to help each other heal together as we try to think about not going back to what early childhood was in the past, but what could be if we thought about a more equitable early childhood for all of our children and families. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to share some data about what it looks like, what the numbers look like around the United States. But I do want to, as I'm sharing this data, just take a moment to, in your mind, remember all this information is going to be important for us to connect with our legislators and share our stories about why early childhood is important to us and the work that we do, and then to get significant investments at the federal level to make sure that young children, families, and educators are well supported during this time and beyond. So your voice matters, and even though there are 331 million Americans across the nation, every vote counts and every voice counts, and please remember that as I'm sharing this data with you. I'll give you a preface too. It's a little bit sad and a little bit scary, but the data hopefully will help us make some important, take some important action to support our children. So across the nation, early education programs, nearly 20% remain closed. And 9% of our family child care homes remain closed across the nation. Next slide. So to put this into context, if those programs stay closed and if those programs don't get significant state and federal investments, across the nation, 4.5 million children may lose access to quality care. And in Arizona, 105,851 children could lose a child care slot at a quality program without significant investment. So take a moment to look at those numbers. That's a lot of children and families impacted by the pandemic. This is not okay, and it's not equitable, and it's not fair, which is why part of my goal tonight is to share some ideas for how you can connect with your legislator and really make sure they understand just how important and complex the work that we do in early childhood is. Next slide. Nationally, 2 out of every 5. Let me backtrack and just mention that the data I'm sharing is from a survey from the National Association for the Education of Young Children. They conducted several surveys over this course of the pandemic. The most recent one in July. These numbers are pretty consistent with what we're seeing currently as what we were seeing in July. 2 out of 5 respondents and half of minority-owned businesses were certain that they would close permanently. Like the childcare program wouldn't even exist anymore without public assistance. So now, as we're looking at the information and the data, I hope you're starting to see that the threat of equity, and that children who are most impacted by the pandemic are children who are Black, Brown, and Indigenous, and specifically programs that are impacted by closures and furloughs and lack of access to things like cleaning supplies or worthy wages for teachers are also our communities that are most underserved and underrepresented. Next slide. Nationally, 1 out of every 4 of our early childhood professionals have reported that they've applied for or received unemployment benefits. And this, just to give you a little bit of context about how many educators that is across the nation. Next slide. The Department of Labor reported in July that 325,000 childcare workers, early childhood educators, teacher assistants, administrators, lost their jobs since February. That's a significant portion of the people who are doing the most important, most complex work of taking care of young children and building young brains of Arizonans and children across the nation. Next slide. Nationally, 73% of programs indicated that they've had to engage in layoffs or furloughs and pay cuts. And in terms of equity, only 12% of minority-owned childcare programs have not resorted to having to lay off, furlough, or do pay cuts. So that means nearly 90% of businesses owned by Black, Brown, and Indigenous educators have had to lay off, furlough, or cut pay for their educators. Next slide. So that data really is very concerning, and I hope you feel a sense of a call to action that our children and our families need us, and our educators need us to step in and be a voice for them, and to make sure that people understand just how important early childhood education is, and get those investments that we need in early care and education. No, there's a little bit of hope and a little bit of glimmer on the horizon. Now more than ever, we have bipartisan support for childcare and early care and education. That is made evident by some of the most recent investments in Congress. Earlier this summer, the House passed the Child Care is Essential Act, which would have funded $50 billion for flexible child care grants across the nation. And then a little bit more recently, $15 billion was allocated in the Senate HEALS Act. Neither of those bills made their way to the other chamber, weren't approved, and didn't go to the president's desk, so that funding didn't get out to child care programs. But the good news is that very recently, October 1st, the House passed the HEROES Act, which included $50 billion in flexible child care grants for providers across the nation, and then $7 billion for the Child Care Development Block Grant. So both chambers, both parties are interested in investing in childcare, and it's really our obligation and our responsibility as early childhood professionals and champions to make our voices heard for our elected officials and make sure that they're making those investments in any of the upcoming relief packages for children, families, and citizens. Next slide, please. So one of the most powerful things you can say as an early childhood professional is to pick up the phone, call your legislative representative and say, I'm a voting constituent. Your vote matters, and the people that we elect into those federal positions at the House of Representatives and our senators is particularly important because those people are the ones voting on bills that would fund things like flexible childcare grants for early childhood programs, Head Start funding, funding for the CCDBG, the Child Care Development Block Grant, small business funding and paycheck protection program, of which many some child care programs have benefited from. So the people that we vote into those offices at the congressional level, at the federal congressional level, are people who are making decisions to invest our federal taxpayer dollars in things that we care about as citizens. And so we have to make sure our voice is heard to let them know that early care and education is a public good. But just some data from the national level. Like I said, now more than ever, the community, I think, really understands how critical and important early care and education is, and really understands the benefits of quality experiences on building the brains of young children. So across the nation, 4 out of 5 voters say that the pandemic has revealed how essential early care and education is, and that early care and education funding needs to be included in the next relief bills that are passed by Congress. Next slide. They rated early care and education as, across the nation, 2/3 of Americans rated it as essential and very important, which means people are thinking about it, people are talking about it. And here's the interesting thing. It's not just families, it's people across the political spectrum, across age, gender, socioeconomic status. People all over America understand just how important the work that we do with young children and families is, and they want investments at the state and at the federal level in quality care and education. Next slide. So here's my call to action for you as I wrap up my section. As I mentioned, your voice is so powerful and your story is powerful. The work that you do, you're the expert at the work that you do, whether you're a teacher in the classroom or a family home provider or working at a state agency or directing a program. You have stories about the impact that your work has done with young children and families, and who better to tell that story than you? So here's my call to action for you. We need to get funding at the federal level in flexible childcare grants to childcare programs across Arizona so that they can survive during the pandemic and then be ready to reopen and thrive when the time comes to better support children, families, and educators. We need childcare to be at the top of mind for US senators. So we know that emailing, tweeting, going on social media is particularly important. But even in this digital age, one of the most meaningful things we can do is just take a moment to pick up the phone and call your senator. Right now, we're encouraging you to call your senator because the House has already passed the HEROES Act, and so we're waiting on the Senate to take some action for children and families. And our legislators represent us. They're paid for by our tax dollars. We're their constituents, and it's their responsibility to listen to our stories and to make decisions based on the information that we're giving them. So I'm encouraging you when you're driving in the car to work, or when you have a moment on your lunch break, or maybe tonight after the vice presidential debates, pick up your phone, call the US Capitol switchboard, and you can connect directly with your senator and let them know why early care and education is important. My next slide. So we encourage you to take a couple of moments to check out our website, azyc.org. And then if you go to azyc.org/voting, we know that there's a lot of information out there for who the candidates are, what are their stances and policies. And so we tried to put everything in one place to make it as easily accessible as possible for those of you who are early childhood champions and want to get out and make your voice heard for children and families. So if you want to find important dates, tips to get to know your candidates and build those relationships with them, even ideas for what you might say to them or what questions you might ask them, and then your rights as a voter, go to azyc.org/voting. And then here's a couple of resources for you to consider as you're being out there, being a champion for young children. So I think I've talked way too long, so I just want to wrap up by saying, take a moment to say it with me. I am a voting constituent, and my voice matters. You're a voting constituent, and your vote matters. So we encourage you to get out there and make your voice heard on behalf of Arizona's children, families, and educators. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. That was great information. And I hope you all heard his plug to turn on the vice presidential debate after tonight's event. So next up, I would like to ask Barbie Prinster to share a little bit more about the work of the Arizona Early Childhood Education Association. Barbie will also be going into a bit more depth about the Arizona Legislature and its impact on the early childhood system. So Barbie, if you can turn your camera on, and you have the floor.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and to Eric and Liz, you did such an excellent job explaining everything. I'm going to talk a little bit about our legislature at the state level and how to navigate the legislative website and ALICE, which some people refer to as ALICE, some people refer to as ALICE. But one of the things I wanted to, our first slide here, we talked a lot about what great things a great investment is in early childhood education. And these are some things that are not so great. There's a lot of research out there. 25% are more likely to drop out of school without a high quality early childhood education. 40% are more likely to become a teen parent. 50% are more likely to be placed in special education. 60% are more likely to never attend college. 70% are more likely to be arrested for a violent crime. So investment in these early childhood programs are really, does make a lifelong difference in the lives of children, families, and also for our country nationwide. Next slide, please. One of our greatest legislative wins, along with securing the $56 million of federal funding, but House Bill 2449 was signed into law in April of 2018. This is the tiered reimbursement bill that we pushed for to help reimbursement rates for child care providers across our state that are contracted with DES and also enrolled in Quality First. So the federal, currently federal law requires that states spend a certain percentage of their total child care funds on services that improve quality care. So we get quality set-aside money. So this bill requires 33% of that quality set-aside money to go to a tiered reimbursement system. So Quality First 4-star providers receive a 10% bump in their child care reimbursement. Quality First 5-star providers receive a 20% reimbursement. And if you're nationally accredited with an accredited organization, you'll receive a 20% reimbursement as well. Now, when we got the CCDBG money, which was part of this $56 million that we got through the federal government, DES also included 3-star centers, and they receive a 5% reimbursement rate, and we're really thankful that they did that as well. Next slide, please. So when we talk about CCDBG, that's called the Child Care Development Block Grant. And so these are some of the, I'm not going to rattle off all of these, but these are some of the things that are required with the reauthorization of this funding that states are, that they have. They said, we're going to give you this money, but we want to increase quality and what we're doing to help take care of children. So their preschool expulsion prevention is part of it. Families are now eligible for 12 months. We have maximum group sizes along in each classroom, health and safety training requirements within a new hire of 90 days, increasing access to affordable high quality care to more low income families, which allowed us to suspend the wait list. In provider reimbursements increased at an average of 20%. We were paying providers an outdated rate of the 75th percentile of the year 2000 market rate survey. And so now we are anywhere between around the 25th percentile of the 2018 market rate survey. In 2021, DES will hopefully be doing another market rate survey. They are required to do that, and I think that they're going to be working on that in conjunction with some other agencies. Additionally, over the last year, Arizona has implemented various initiatives that increase the percent of children on subsidy that are placed in quality childcare settings from 35% to 41%. That's a big jump, and it's a really, really great thing that we were seeing pre-COVID. That's kind of changed a lot of things. However, improvements to increase quality and affordability of early learning opportunities for children and access to low-income families and children in the child welfare system continue to remain a critical focus, and COVID-19 has impacted us statewide. Next slide, please. You know, one thing I didn't mention in that last slide is that there is a fingerprinting requirement that goes along with that federal, the federal rule too, that providers or people that you hire have to already have a valid fingerprint card when you hire them. There are ways that we're working on this, and licensing is being very helpful in working around having a workaround on how to do this. If you have questions on that, please contact me and I'll help you. The Central Registry background check is still kind of a work in progress. The Office of Child Care has given states another year to figure that piece out. That is a tough piece, but I know that our state DES is working on trying to streamline that process. If you're currently contracted with DES, you send your registry, that background information into the Child Care Administration Unit. If you are not contracted, you send your that registry information directly to DCS. So we're trying to streamline it so everything goes to one agency and it's processed by one agency as quickly as possible, and it's not a barrier to hire employees. So on this slide, we have a little snapshot of what the DES budget request is. In the middle white box, we can see what pieces are used for the CARES Act and then the CCDF funding. The CARES Act, we had the Arizona Enrichment Scholarships were a huge help to our healthcare, first responders, child care providers, grocery store workers, and at a higher reimbursement rate. But it was super helpful during the middle of the pandemic when people were really struggling. Also through the CARES Act was a grant program that was launched, and the first round of payments went out. Over 1,900 applications were received statewide, which is a fantastic number. One of the things that they are going to do as well, using part of the CARES Act money for next year, is increasing paid absences. Right now you get 2 paid absences a day for a child. Now they will get an additional 3 days, so they'll be having 5 days a month that a child can miss if they're sick, if their family is sick, and not be penalized, or have to pay an additional fees if you know, if what the provider charges is any different than what they're reimbursed at. So that's super helpful. The other thing that they're going to be doing too is looking at DCS children that leave for the day during services, for if they have services off-site and they come back. Previously, we've only been able to bill for a half day for that, and now we will be able to bill for a full day. So that will be super helpful as well. So the DES has submitted their budget to the governor's office and asked for an additional $93 million in spending authority. We do have about $10 million in reserve from the CARES Act money, and with this authority, if the governor approves this as is, then the wait list should be suspended until July of 2022. Next slide, please. So we're going to get into the legislative website now. I would invite you to go to azleg.gov and add that to your favorites tab on your website, because there's so much information in here. And this is where you're going to find everything that you want to know about committees, about legislators, about what they voted on, who's in the Senate, who's in the House, who's this, the Speaker of the House, everything, calendar of events of what's going on down at the Capitol. There's just a plethora of information on in this website. Next slide. Actually, let's skip that. Next slide, please. So Eric talked about what district do you live in? Do you know what district you are? And there are many ways to find this out. Now I'm going to do it through this website here. Now you can go to azleg.gov, and on the bottom part of it, in the blue part, it's very, very small, but it does say legislative maps. You can click on that, or you can go to the tab where it says Senate and House and open up that, and it will actually, the next tab will show you how to find that. But if we go to legislative maps, next slide, please. In the yellow box, kind of in the top of the middle where it says address, that's actually the address of Children's Action Alliance. So they typed in their address, clicked on find, and it tells you that you're in Congressional District 9 and you're in Legislative District 24. On the side over here, you can also, before you type in your address, if you're looking for more information, you want to know what school district, township, counties, all of those information, you can click on those before that, and it will also give you information. Next slide, please. So on this, actually, you know what? Go to the next slide. I'm sorry. So now we know that we're in, before we were talking about we're in District 24. If we, this is the member roster for the House of Representatives. Over on the right-hand side, you can see the button is kind of colorful. It says Find My Legislator. You can also go, and that will take you back to that same website. On this page, it's listed, it's in the, and again, this is from like, this is old, this is from 2018. So these people might not be around anymore, but you can click where it says legislator. It will sort this list by alphabetical by first name. You can click on district and it will sort it from district by district numbers. You can sort it by party, however you want to do it. And then you can click on that. Let's say the second from the top is Leila Alston. If you wanted to click on that, it will open it up. It will give you all the information about her, her biography, what committees she sits on, and all sorts of different information. The email is right there too, where her office is and what phone number she has as well. Next slide, please. Now, if you're looking for a specific bill, there's a couple ways that you can do this. If you hover over the tab that says bills, it brings up quite a bit of information here. You can either go to bill tracking or you can go to bill info. Next slide, please. So if we went to bill info, it comes up this way. It shows you this right away. So for House, it has House bills and Senate bills. House bills are going to start with HB and the number, they start at number 2001. And then Senate bills start with the SB and they start with the number 1001. Next page. Now, if we clicked on that, instead of clicked on bill info, we clicked on bill tracking, it will take you to this page right here. And this is where you can customize things for you to look in. This is where you're going to sign in to support or not support a specific bill. You can track bills, all sorts of things from this piece right here. Up in the left-hand corner, we typed in HB 2449, and this is the tiered reimbursement bill that we worked on. So what this shows you is it shows you the history. Now you can't scroll down here, but this has the history from the time that the bill was submitted and went to its committee all the way up to, it shows you every single step that this bill took up to when it was signed by the governor. It shows you who the sponsor of the bill is. The prime sponsor, it was Representative Udall. There were two other sponsors on it too, but that it will show up if you click that arrow down. Next slide, please. So in this, the blue line up here, the overview was what was clicked on before. Now we have the RTS current bill positions. This will show you who has signed in support of this bill, who is signed in against it, or who is maybe neutral about it. And it will show you, you can sign in as yourself, or you can do it as an association as well. Okay, we're gonna speed up because I'm losing time here. Go next slide, please. This is where you can find all of the bill documents. This blue line here is going to take you to everything that you need to know. You know what, go ahead and you can skip the next couple ones, skip the next one. There we go. So here's a list of committee members. You can go to committees. This is like a committee, whoop, you can go back just to the last one. So this would be a committee, the education committee. They meet the same time, usually the same room, once every week, and it will show you which bills that they're going through and the ones that you want to comment on or you want to request to speak. Go ahead, next slide. All of this information is additional information that's available on ALICE. Links to the websites are archived information, their rules, Arizona revised statutes, capital events, live proceedings. Go ahead. Next slide. Go ahead. We'll skip through that. Next slide. Next slide. So once you've got an account into Alice, you have to create a username and a password. You will have to go down to the kiosk, either in the Senate or the House, and activate that. Or if you know somebody that's going to be down there and you're comfortable giving their information, they could already sign in for you. Once you sign in once, then you're good, and then you can log in from home and sign in to support a bill. Advocating for yourself, like Eric said, is really important. If you want to schedule a meeting with a legislator, you've got to be flexible, you've got to be fast, you've got to have all of your points in front of you ready to go. Please dress business dress for a good business meeting. Tell them your story, thank them, give them a commitment question. Will you commit to funding and continuing to advocate for early childhood education? We need your help. We need their voice. Thank them, invite them to visit your center, do a virtual tour, which is really popular right now. First Things First has done a bunch of them. They even did a virtual tour with Martha McSally with 3 providers. So we're kind of in that virtual world right now. So please reach out to me and we can figure out how to get one set up. But contact your legislators and tell them that you either live or you work in their community, and childcare is important for parents to go back to work. And the other thing the last thing I was going to tell you is that voter registration has been extended until October 23rd. As of yesterday, or within the last 24 hours, they've had over 15,000 new people register to vote, which is a record. So if you know somebody that is not registered, ask them to please register to vote. Ask them to go vote. Early voting started today as well. So thank you again, and I look forward to hearing and seeing all of you soon.
Thank you so much, Barbie, for all that information that you shared. I know that you have extensive information about using the ALICE system at the legislature, and hopefully we can do a second iteration of this webinar and bring folks back so they can learn how to use the request to speak system, especially in time for next legislative session. So let's talk about bringing you back to do a more extensive training on that if you're open to that.
Sure.
Great. So for our next presentation tonight, I would like to ask Rhonda Editsy. Rhonda, if you could go ahead and turn your camera on now. We'd just like to hear a little bit more about your personal experience. I know a lot of folks that are listening in have early childhood or personal experience already, but for those folks who maybe haven't been in the early childhood system or don't have young children, if they're not parents, it would just be great to hear some stories, particularly stories that are coming from the more rural parts of Arizona, because I know I live in rural Arizona and I know that we have our own unique challenges, we have our own unique opportunities as well. So if you can talk a bit more about your role as a Quality First coach, and also as your role as the vice chair for the Navajo Nation Regional Partnership Council, if you can talk a bit about how funding and policy impacts the early childhood system in rural Arizona, and if there's things that we should, we meaning voters and advocates, should be aware of.
Thank you, Jennifer, and I appreciate, and I'm learning a lot, and I appreciate all the panelists and the information that they're sharing tonight. As Jennifer mentioned, my name is Rhonda Editsy. Shea Rhonda Editsy Yanishia Kifachi Initially Do Tatnazani Bashishi Ashihia Dashache Do Tachi Ni Dashanella. Those are my clans. I'm a member of the Dene tribe, Navajo Nation, and like Jennifer had shared, I am a Quality First coach with Association for Supportive Childcare, and the work I do consists of 2 regions. You heard Liz talk about earlier how the state of Arizona is broken into different regions, and I support programs through the Quality First system within Coconino and Navajo Nation. And through my agency of ASK, Association for Supportive Childcare, we're a nonprofit, and we also provide services not only with coaching, but professional development and training, also family support and education. And really our vision is to ensure that every child is safe and supported, happy, and has the hope for a bright, fulfilling future. And like everyone here that's joined us tonight, you know, our focus is really supporting young children and what's best for them. And so when we think about that, also in my role as the vice chair for the Navajo Nation First Things First Regional Council, we look at, and again, you heard Liz speak to this as far as a collaborative effort of members on that regional council, and really looking at what the community needs and how we can support them through that lens of early childhood. And so that also comprises of looking at funding, and you heard a little bit more about that in detail earlier and how that funding system looks at. But also when we think about early childhood in the systems of rural Arizona, I like for us to also think about how that funding is decided upon, and really looking at the effort to ensure that adequate funding is leveraged across the state. More specifically, in speaking to rural Arizona, we also want to consider how that is all collected and counted. In thinking about counting, we also think about census. And the reason why I bring this up is because as a regional council, this information also is important in deciphering and determining the strategies that how we want to support our communities within the Navajo Nation region. And so it was great to hear tonight that really the efforts to encourage everyone to vote, but also to make sure that you're counted, because that is a huge factor in what we think about how that funding is supported. But like I mentioned earlier, it's really helps to support where we want that funding to go. And thinking about stories in my work as a Quality First coach. So Quality First is a program of First Things First. And through that partners with childcare and preschool providers across the Arizona, we're really looking at how to improve the quality of early learning for kids birth to 5. And so Quality First is established statewide standard of quality for early care and education programs, and funds quality improvements that research to prove and help children thrive. And so as a collaborative, as a technical assistant provider, I also work with childcare health consultants and a mental health consultant. And as a team, we support Quality First programs. And so you heard a little bit, Eric talked about how COVID has directly impacted early childhood, and also seeing the statistics and the numbers and really how significant that is. We think about how, more specifically when we think about rural, how that directly impacts, because there are centers that are closed. With Navajo Nation being a sovereign nation, you know, we follow the advice and the guidance that's set by our Navajo Nation president in efforts to really down the number of COVID cases and keeping everybody safe. Those centers were closed. And so as a coaching team, you know, we really had to think about how we can support programs in a more creative way to ensure that those services aren't gone, or that that support system is still available and continues through this, through our circumstances here. And so really being creative and meeting virtually, and more than often when we think about rural Arizona, a lot of those conversations and those support systems are coming through the phone service. And so I think really when we think about what I would like to share and have voiced is really thinking about how that funding source, but also how we continue those services to ensure that all rural communities are provided that voice, and really trying to give them the support systems that they need. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, for sharing your perspective. and for being part of our panel tonight. We are just about out of time for this evening's presentation. For those of you that are able to stick around for a few more seconds, I did just want to run briefly through the resources that Expect More Arizona has available. So I'm just going to do that quickly. If you need to leave us, we certainly understand, but just do pop over to our website at expectmorearizona.org/vote, because you're going to find lots of helpful tools and a place where you can sign up to do things like register to vote and to check your voter registration status. As Barbie mentioned, Arizona just extended the deadline to register to vote this year to October 23rd. So there is still time. We'd love for you to look at our website so that you can study up and learn more about how your vote makes a difference. If you didn't get enough inspiration from the great folks that we heard tonight. You'll also find tools to help you speak up. So if you've never reached out to a candidate before and you're not quite sure what to say to them, we have some great tools on our website that can show you, give you some ideas of things that you can say. And then we have deadlines and dates so that you make sure that you actually show up so that you don't miss out on the opportunity to exercise your right to vote. So really quickly, just under candidate and elected officials tab, you can put your home address into the search box, find out who your elected officials are, and you can also find out who's running for office in your region. We've included the candidates and incumbents contact information there where possible, so that you can reach out to them whatever method you're most comfortable with to ask them questions about early learning. And if you don't know what kinds of questions to ask, you can see we have a sample question right there. We have questions about all levels of education, early learning, secondary, K-12, and we have other organizations that we partner with. We have their questionnaires and voter guides, as well as an overview of the 2 statewide ballot measures that's impact to education, information about bonds and overrides, among other tools. So please do take some time to check out those resources for yourself. And we were unable to get to any Q&A tonight, but we will be reading those and we will to answer any Q&A that you may have. So just a reminder, the next in our Vote for Education webinar series, we're having next week on Wednesday, October 14th at 4 p.m. and it will cover how your vote impacts post-secondary education. We've got a great group of experts joining us for that. I do want to say thanks again to our fantastic panelists for sharing all of their wisdom and so many resources with us tonight. I know I learned so much. And thanks to all of those watching and listening for your participation this evening. This webinar will be recorded and it's also available on our Facebook page for repeated viewing. But if you have questions or feedback, please reach out to me. You can see my email address there. And then I'm just going to ask our panelists if they have any follow-up or anything else that they'd like to share to go ahead and do so now.
I guess I would just say your voice is powerful. Get out there and research your candidates. Ask them hard questions about how they're going to support equity in early childhood, how they're going to invest in our children, families, and educators, and get out there and vote either by mail or safely in person.
I'd also like to add, if you would like to learn more about how regional councils and how the funding source really supports your community, like everybody, you can visit the First Things First website, but also more information in regards to Quality First. We also have a Quality First website, and which are both great resources to kind of become familiarized with this program and also the system. Thank you. I appreciate the time.
And if anyone needs those web resources, they are First Things First, all one word, .org, or Quality First AZ, all one word.com.
And Barbie, did you have final parting words for us tonight?
What I just put it in the chat box, you know, find 3 friends that aren't registered to vote, ask them to register, show them how, and then tell them to do the same.
We love that. We love that. Thank you guys so much again. Thanks to everybody. We had a great group of participants tonight. Thanks so much, everybody, for your attention. Have a great rest of your evening. Go watch the debates and reach out to us if you have questions. Thanks so much. Night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, good night.